Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show, folks. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand. And on the show today, I have for the second time Keith Malcomson, who is in Ireland. And Keith, I had you on the show just recently, and the response from people was extremely good, and people asking, did I get you back? And so here we go. Back for a second time in a few weeks, and so it's great to actually have the chance to talk to you again, you know, with the big time differences between us and everything.
Hi Tony, really good to be back with you. Just loved talking with you last time, and a wonderful response. Just amazing to read people's response on your video as well.
Yes, I was very encouraged by it as well. But I thought it was an excellent discussion that we had last time, so I'm sure today's will be just as good. And I want to start by looking a little bit at what's happening now with this COVID-19. And I see in England, Boris Johnson's announced lockdowns for at least 6 weeks, like hard lockdowns and everything. And other countries, in fact, I was reading an article this morning on stuff.co.nz about, you know, all these countries with this explosion of this new COVID variant, and of course it's going to be used for increased lockdowns everywhere, which I guess is going to aid in destroying economies, and that'll fit nicely in with the Great Reset. So what's happening in Ireland?
Yeah, it's the same here, Tony, where they kept changing it. During December, I think they changed it about several times. I heard one lawyer say she couldn't even keep up with the law herself because they kept changing, the boundaries in this. So they ended up suddenly changing it where we locked down the day after Christmas. And it just keeps changing all the time. So it's meant to be to the end of January. But even there was a hint this could go on for 6 months. So it's remarkable how they can keep hanging this over people and there's no reaction on a national scale. That's what stuns me.
I think, because people are now lulled into, the vaccine will be the answer. Let's just wait for that to be rolled out enough and so on, and which I think is another deception as well. But yeah, it is kind of stunning how easily people are just accepting this because they keep producing these scary numbers of, how many people have got it and supposedly dying of it and so on.
Yeah, it really is. And I think now what's concerning me, and I think you've dealt with it maybe in one or two of your programs recently, is now when you start thinking if legislation's going to come in, say, for the workplace. So, for example, a young man in our church asked us, about taking the vaccine because now his boss is almost putting pressure saying, of course, all the workforce is going to immediately take the vaccine as soon as it comes in. And this is someone who was involved with crime and different things before, who's now got a very good job, works very hard, and now the threat of losing that. So suddenly, I think that just hit me just 10 days ago when he'd said that, is this pressure is unbelievable. And suddenly when you realize this is what's coming, it becomes very, very sinister.
I totally agree. And I saw an article, what's the Daily Mail, I think it was, a few days ago, where it was talking about the number of healthcare workers that are reluctant to take the vaccine. I think it was a very high percentage. It could have even been 50% or something like that. So, worried about side effects and so on. And so they're going to have to put a pretty big bullying operation into play to get, I guess, the result, which is to get as many people as they can vaccinated as possible. But the bullying result seems to be working great with lockdowns because everyone's just rolling over pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the pressure is definitely on. And every time you think they won't do this or won't push it further, it seems that they do. So we can see where it's going and we can see what we're going to face. And it's very important mentally that we prepare now, and we've got a mind to face this, and we're sure of what we believe.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely coming to that. I was thinking very much about that a couple of days ago, realizing, gee, this is going to get serious. New Zealand may be a little slower behind in some ways, but it's still going to come here. I've noticed that here in New Zealand that they've been putting increasing border control measures in the last few days. It's going to make it harder for people to come here because the borders control is where they've got us, here because they're not wanting anybody to escape into the community because we've basically got no COVID in the community at the moment at all in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And so there's no face masks and no social distancing or limits on crowds or anything in New Zealand. But trying to actually get into the country, boy, it's harder now than it was when Holly and I came back here in mid-November, and had to quarantine, and all of that kind of thing. But it's much harder now already than what it was then. So, but I can see that even here, all I need to do is let one or two people escape into the community, and then bang, they'll bring lockdowns here too.
Yes.
So, it's interesting times, that's for sure.
It very much is, Tony. It really is.
Yep, and I don't see it improving. So, 2021 doesn't look good, but we are, like you say, going to have to decide for ourselves what we believe and what we going to stick to, and how much are we going to trust God and so on, because I think the pressure is going to come on very, very strongly.
Yeah. And it is leading somewhere. I think for someone who knows the Bible, knows Bible prophecy, and certainly from a kid, I've just loved to study these things, look at these things. When you see this, it's remarkable. It was just 7 years ago. I sat with just young converts here in the church in Limerick. And one of the things I said to them was, one thing I can't understand about Bible prophecy, from my perspective, is how do we go from this normal secular world that we live in to this very strange, unusual scenario that we see in Bible prophecy, in Scripture, in that generation before Christ returns. And to be quite honest, Tony, it's literally happening. The world is becoming a very strange place, and whether someone believes in the Bible or not, they cannot deny that something significant has just happened.
It's happened so rapidly, really. I mean, even this time last year, you would never have expected that things would be as they are. And we were starting to hear the word coronavirus this time last year, but I don't think anybody would have predicted, exactly what's transpired, unless you're, of course, an insider that probably planned the whole thing and is rubbing their hands.
I was going to say that. In fact, I've just got a quote for you here just to read to you as we speak. And it's from just inside COVID-19, The Great Reset by Schwab. And it's him back in June time, whenever he released this book. It's called COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. Listen to what he says here. It's just inside, it's page 41. And this is him laying out a possible scenario back in June 2020. And I think it's very insightful. In fact, when I read this back in July time or beginning of August, I actually went, this is what they're actually going to do. So I went on the basis over the next several months, they're really going to implement this. So he talks about it potentially continuing to 2022. And then he says, in the first scenario, the initial wave that began in March 2020 is followed by a series of smaller waves that occur through to the mid-2020, and then over a 1 and 2 year period, gradually diminishing in 2021, like peaks and valleys. And this is how he goes on. He's actually laying out a full scenario. And then he says further that policymakers must be prepared to deal with it for at least another 18 to 24 months of significant COVID-19 activity, with hotspots popping out in different areas. And he goes on, but they're laying out these scenarios back in June of what was going to happen. And do you know what? I very quickly realized with that they had this all laid out. And you know what? You look back at what he writes in June, and it's just played out, and it is playing out into 2021.
I've said to people so many times now, Event 201, from October 2019, and they had a practice run for a coronavirus pandemic that would kill millions of people around the world. And the three sponsors of that were A, the World Economic Forum, of course, which is Klaus Schwab and his Davos crowd. That's them. That were one of the three main sponsors. The second one was the Johns Hopkins Institute. And the third one was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I mean, they laid out the whole blueprint in a way with how they were going to deal with this thing just before it happened, like a practice run. And you can't tell me that was coincidence. It's just too similar. And the way they would control the freedom of speech and censorship and all of these types of things. If I'm sure many of those listening will have watched that by now, or at least parts of it, because it was so blatant to me that the big players today in the actual pandemic were, well, plandemic or whatever you want to call it. I know people have different opinions about how real the virus is or isn't. I have, well, I don't want to go too much into that at the moment, but the point of the matter is the scenario of how they were going to deal with it is playing out how they practiced it.
Yeah, it really is. And again, it's not us saying this. I mean, just here in front of me, I've got all of Schwab's books. And really, the more you look at it, Tony, I've never made stronger statements about what they're doing than what he has written in his own books. And the more I look at it, the more sinister it is. You don't need commentary on it. You don't need to add to it. His own statements and all these global organizations that are pulling behind this, the World Economic Forum, IMF, the UN, etc., 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 and all these top world international companies, they're all pulling behind this. And when you read what their agenda is, because Schwab has written it very clearly, it is sinister, it's deeply disturbing, and anyone in their right mind would not want this future for our world. And yet, when I read where he wants to take this and where he believes it's going to go, then I see the biblical scenario. It's an exact duplicate of what my Bible says will happen just right at the end.
And it's interesting, of course, that Klaus Schwab is a transhumanist, and that's obviously big part of where he wants us to go, along with so many other people. I mean, I've covered Ray Kurzweil from Google and people like that, very strong transhumanists, and that's really where they want this whole scenario of the Great Reset to go, ultimately, is to change humanity. And I know you've covered a little bit of that in videos. You've done a series of videos on the Great Reset, which have been actually excellent references for people to listen to or watch on. I recommend that people do.
Yeah. I mean, it really is transhumanism, and that's important that people realize where this is going. It's not just about the economy. It's not just about politics or society or anything like this. I really believe that a central goal and focus and end that they're looking to take us to is transhumanism. And in fact, it's very easy to prove it. Again, I've got Schwab's book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, he released that in 2016, and that's when they came out publicly at Davos that year. The whole theme was the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Since then, they pushed it. What is the Fourth Industrial Revolution? It's actually their master plan. And in fact, he defines what the Fourth Industrial Revolution means. If you listen to this quote, this is what he said. He said, "It is characterized by a fusion of the technologies that are blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres." So our entire physical world, the digital realm of computer, and the biology of our body, he says the Fourth Industrial Revolution is characterized or marked. Now, remember, this is his words, by a fusion between these things. So the actual line that's very clear between our physical world, our bodies, our own biology, and that of technology and the internet, he says you won't even be able to distinguish. That is the fourth industrial revolution. Now, listen to what he says in his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And in fact, for writing that book, they done a survey with 800 executives, and you can imagine who they are. That's all the top supporting executives of Davos and the World Economic Forum. Now, they done a survey with 800 top business leaders. And just listen to this for a moment, Tony, where he actually calls this survey the deep shift, technology tipping points, and social impact. And he lists out 23 different technology shifts that we're going to see in this fourth industrial revolution. Now, remember, he's written this back 4 years ago in 2016. They have a clear plan. So when the reset button is pressed in June 2020, this is what they want to introduce. They're actually saying, let's go for this now. Listen to what, and anyone can find it in that book on page 121 again. What is the first shift of the fourth industrial revolution? And I'm reading here, implantable technologies. And he says the tipping point, the first implantable mobile phone available commercially. And that'll be by 2025. And 82% of those 800 executives, they actually said the tipping point would come by 2025. In other words, the technology of what is in your mobile phone today, or what your mobile phone can do, and all the technology is actually going to be in your physical body. And 82% of these businessmen said it will be in your body by 2025. So that is the first one. Now, let me jump to the second to last one, the shift 22. What does he call it? Designer beings. And there he talks about the first human whose genome was directly and deliberately edited is born. So you can see from beginning to end that the fourth industrial revolution, it is transhumanism. This isn't a joke. And this is what the UN is pulling behind. This is what the International Monetary Fund is pulling behind. This is what the EU is pulling behind. This is what all the companies from Google all the way through to Facebook are pulling behind.
Yeah, it is pretty scary. I think the other thing too is tie that in with depopulation and robotics too, because, well, the Georgia Guidestones, obviously, people know, most would know about that, with the hold the world at 500 million population type of thing, and now we've got, well, this big rollout of the vaxxers and so on. I wonder where that fits in with it, but we could become dispensable to the elite. They don't need lots of people. And I watched a video just the other day put out by Boston Dynamics where I've covered them a bit before in videos quite some time ago. They have a robot called Atlas that they've been a prototype, and I've watched the development in their videos and just how agile this robot's become. And the latest one, they have Atlas dancing, and assuming it's not CGI, because Boston Dynamics has not used CGI before, but genuine footage. So I'm assuming that it's genuine footage. The robots have become so incredibly agile, it's not funny. I mean, a humanoid robot that is dancing so amazingly well, and that goes to some, along with some of the stuff in the past where this robot's doing backflips and landing on its feet and all kinds of stuff. And this is a scary looking robot, and you can see, man, the progress they've made in the last 4 years on the Atlas robots is looking scary. You could imagine them putting guns into these things or whatever and producing an army of them. And now Hyundai actually bought Boston Dynamics for $1.1 billion, I think. So there's going to be a lot of money invested into robotics and things like that too. So really, the point I'm trying to make is the elite oligarchs could in the end decide, well, we don't need so many people, we can use robots. So then they cull off a lot of the population. I can see that as a distinct possibility because that fits in with their whole supposed green agenda and saving the planet and all that. There's too many people, so according to them. So really the future looks, like you say, decidedly you can see how it fits in with Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation and so on. Just it's becoming so apparent.
Yeah, it's what, I mean, it is really astounding, Tony. Like, so you've got your Bible in one hand and you've got all the commentary on what's happening and what they want to make happen in the other hand, and you go, this is an absolute vital hour and people are going to be forced to really make a choice in this hour. I believe it's becoming so explicit that you really will have to have a corrupt heart to deny that there's something very sinister going on. But you can see science fiction, it seems like over the past 150 years, and with H.G. Wells, I mean, he was a globalist. He spoke about the New World Order very clearly and distinctly, met with the Fabians and all.
Yeah, it's interesting you were going to bring that up because that was what I was going to ask you, because Aldous Huxley, George Orwell and H.G. Wells were all members of the Fabian Society. And in fact, it's really interesting that the book 1984, as we know, was George Orwell's famous book. 1984 was actually the centenary year of the Fabian Society.
Yeah. I mean, just before the First World War, they were all meeting in a small group there in London. And I mean, H.G. Wells is meeting with Milner, and even towards the end of the First World War, you had books being written by politicians, and H.G. Wells is helping them. I mean, one of the first books that actually, on what they were going to create at the end of the First World War, the League of Nations, a book with the title The League of Nations. H.G. Wells is writing that and involved with that. And you've got Milner under an alias. Milner was Rhodes' man. He was Rhodes' second in command. And these men are writing books together about the League of Nations. And when they were writing about these things, they wanted a global government. The League of Nations at the end of the First World War, 1919, was the first attempt at a world government of this sort in modern history. And in fact, they thought they would manage to pull it off then. And even Woodrow Wilson in America, Americans might not like to hear this, but Woodrow Wilson was a globalist, but America voted against him as a nation. And it was the influence of evangelical preachers that influenced that decision. America stood against joining the League of Nations. And the two main secretaries over the League of Nations, they resigned once they realized that the nation state still had sovereignty when the League of Nations was created. They just stepped down. But you've got H.G. Wells in the midst of that, writing books about the League of Nations during the First World War with Milner. Do you know, you couldn't invent this. This is far more exciting than any novel that anyone could possibly write. If you just begin to look at history and how these lives weave together, and with H.G. Wells, of course, his friend Huxley, when they write Brave New World, the entire world broken down into 10 regions with 10 leaders and a united Europe. I mean, what are we reading here? We're talking about men who I believe have impacted our world right down to the contemporary leaders. And I really do believe we're heading in a very sinister direction. And these men are not innocent. They knew what they're doing well over the past 150 years.
Yeah, well, you covered in the last video you did, part 4, I think it was, of the Great Reset, the Huxley family and how far back they go. Perhaps you maybe could just reiterate a little bit of that.
Yeah, because obviously, you know, Julian Huxley, his grandfather was Thomas Huxley, who was also called Darwin's bulldog. I think most would know about Huxley and Darwin. But really, Huxley was the first one who published a book called Evidence as to Man's Place in Nature. He was the first one that connected man to apes. Darwin didn't want to do that. Darwin was reluctant to be explicit. It was Huxley, who was called his bulldog, who was driving him to come out and to make this connection of evolution. So you're talking about, when you begin to trace this back, you cannot separate the creation of the whole theory of evolution from all of this transhumanism. It is utterly impossible, and there's a reason that we'll come to maybe here in a moment. But Thomas Huxley, I mean, he was the driving force behind that. But Thomas Huxley, and this is the grandfather of the writer of Brave New World, he actually had a good friend who was a Jesuit called Teilhard, of who we could say very much, but he was a strange character. He had strange ideas about the cosmic brain, about the cosmic Christ, about the next stage of evolution. He was a very strange character and a very strong evolutionist. So he was a very good friend of Huxley. So you've got all of these influences at the end of the 19th century coming together of this idea of where mankind is going. So it's not a new thing. And we should never think that transhumanism began in the 90s. I've heard that many times. That is not true. It goes back 100 years where they begin thinking like this. So Thomas Huxley, his two grandsons are very interesting. One of them, called Julian Huxley, was actually the first Director General of UNESCO, which is part of the United Nations, dealing with the scientific side of the United Nations. And he promoted the whole idea of evolution within the education side of things in the United Nations, and very strongly into eugenics, a real globalist. And in fact, he was the first one to release an article called Transhumanism. I think it was back in the 50s. You could look it up. So here is the grandson of the bulldog Huxley, and who was so adamant about evolution. Now you've got this coming down into the United Nations, eugenics, transhumanism. And who is Julian Huxley's brother? It's Aldous Huxley, who actually wrote Brave New World. And that was written in 1932, all about the world state, which was split. And I mean, think of it, the word in here, the world state split into 10 regions with 10 world controllers who use cloning and use mind control through drugs. I really believe these men were prophesying. H.G. Wells, Huxley, all of them were prophesying through their books about what was to come. And men like Schwab and all the rest of them, they've only picked up on this. They themselves have been affected and educated on these things.
I think actually Schwab was under Henry Kissinger at some point, as a mentor, which straight away tells you, aha, you knew Henry Kissinger had to be in the mix here somewhere.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's almost, like in the church, we've seen in the church how a revivalist, great preachers produce other preachers. I think of Leonard. I just, listen to all those messages. It affects you.
Sorry, that broke up. Can you just repeat that?
Okay. Do you know preachers like Leonard Ravenhill? I just loved him. I've listened to hundreds of his messages. But like in the church world, we read the writings of great preachers, great leaders, great pastors like C.H. Spurgeon, and it affects you. There's convictions. If you believe what they're saying, if you see what they're saying about Christ, it has a big impact. Or reading the old fashioned revivalists, Evan Roberts, or any of these great revivalists, it impacts you. So what we have in the church, they do have in this secular world. You almost have a spiritual genealogy of writings, of vision that gets passed down. And that's a very real thing. It is out there. So what we're seeing in our world now actually has a history, a long, long history, going back to the French Revolution and back further to Plato. So it really is remarkable, Tony, of we really are coming to a finale point. And when you read some of their writings about the New World Order, about transhumanism, about genetics, it's all been written about for many, many generations.
Yeah, well, you mentioned back to the French Revolution. Well, of course, I'm thinking back to Adam Weishaupt, the
Yeah,
original founder of the Illuminati, and you look at the goals that they laid out back in 1776 and around about that time, and boy, they are playing out today. Obviously, they couldn't have foreseen the transhumanism and all of that then, but their basic socialist type New World Order is playing out. And yeah, I think there's lineages that go all the way back through, Illuminist lineages that have
yeah.
a vested interest in pushing us to where we are going. And of course, but these days people go, oh, you're just a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist and all that. But I think even that's a smokescreen to try and divert people from realizing that there are genealogies and lineages behind this whole movement.
Yeah. Do you know, this is why I'm a great lover of just reading books, Tony. I love reading, secular history, church history. I just love reading about different aspects because, books don't lie. Men lie, but, books, when something's written there and you have evidence and proof. So like with Klaus Schwab, I've got all his books sitting here. I just love to quote from him because I'm not inventing this. I'm not inventing this. He has said these things. We quote him and say, this is what they're going to do. But with the French Revolution, when you go back, the old French and German philosophers, they actually write, and it's remarkable when you read it, about a world revolution. It was never about the French Revolution. They talked about a world state, something that H.G. Wells talked frequently about and wrote entire books about. He got that from the French philosophers just before the French Revolution. And these philosophers, they're the ones who affected Count Weishaupt and the French Revolution. It was all their writings. They wanted a world revolution. They wanted a world state. They wanted the redistribution of wealth. Now, what have we heard throughout this year increasingly? The redistribution of wealth. Go back and read about it in the French Revolution. They wanted it for this world revolution. And some of those French Revolution philosophers, I mean, when you write about them, they had an entire plan about how to bring this about, how to deal with opposition, how to put down opposition, how to use force. It wasn't just about the French Revolution. They wanted to take it further. And I'm fully convinced that the Bavarian Illuminati, they planned the French Revolution. There's no doubt about that. And in fact, we didn't have the full evidence until the 1990s, because once communism fell as such, so-called, the diaries come out. A lot of stuff came out from behind the Iron Curtain. And one of them was the diaries of French Freemasonists and Germans who actually, they planned it, they organized it. It was the Bavarian Illuminati that were integral to that. It was an organized thing. They weren't quick enough to get in on the American Revolution, I believe, and I believe so many revivals in America preserved America in a way. But it's amazing, Tony. It just sometimes when I look at that, at the minute, I see it all coming together. And you just see, when you read history, you can really see what's coming. It was Churchill who actually said, if you study history and look at the past, it makes you a prophet.
Interesting, yeah. Churchill had his own New World Order quotes too. But I'm just thinking, slightly moving on from that to
Sure.
The transhumanism thing again, is that I covered ages ago Metropolis, the movie, I think was 1927, and that really is a blueprint for occult sort of New World Order and transhumanism right there in a movie that far back. And when you think of the date of some of those types of movies and realize that, the technology was used then, it was pretty primitive compared to today, but to show what the goal was, and I think it comes out in that movie and some other ones from around about that time as well. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is certainly not just something that's popped up in the 1990s, this whole transhumanism. It's been obviously a goal for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It's got a long pattern, and when I see it then come up, and it's an integral part of the fourth industrial revolution. I mean, it is integral. It's central, and in fact, as they implement this and press the reset button, this isn't just one side issue or some fantasy or some make believe thing. This is what they've written in that they want to do. They want to merge us physically with that digital world. This is what the fourth industrial revolution is. So all that's gone before in all the science fiction, all of these previous writers, all their ideology, we now see it affecting world politics. And we see all the great businessmen, all the bankers, all of these people converging, coming together. And really, this is a central part of it, Tony. And I think if people do not wake up now and realize that the technology that is being released is going to be used with an agenda, everything is going to converge. And if you listen to these men, what they're saying is 2025, it's going to hit the street, the high street, and it's going to sweep people. They're going to want that mobile phone in their body by 2025. And again, we're not saying this. We're not predicting. We're quoting men who make these things happen. We're talking about the tech giants like Google, Microsoft, and all the rest. This is what's behind it.
It's interesting too that whilst so many people are struggling financially in the world at the moment after all these COVID lockdowns, and so many small businesses are, shuttering permanently, and people are, just can't compete with the giants. You look at people like Elon Musk, who's made billions through this whole COVID thing, and we know he's launching all these satellites into space for communication purposes and electric cars and all the rest of it. And then Jeff Bezos from Amazon. These are now supposedly the two richest people, I think, and they've made billions. And of course, Amazon has basically killed off all the competition. I'm sure there are other bankers and so on that hide behind the shadows that are probably more wealthy than any of those two. But of course, these are the public faces of wealth. And while the rest of us are struggling, the fact is that they're bringing everything into smaller and smaller conglomerates to control everything. So the small fellas can't compete because it'll be all centralized.
Yeah, it is that centralization. And I mean, you can just see it on every single front. Every single area of life is convergent. So, I mean, even all these areas, they keep saying that they don't want any separation between the private sector and the public sector. And they use a lot of statements continually. And you go, what are they saying? And I'm always someone, I want to understand what people are saying. I want to understand terms. When you understand their terms, it is very worrying, because they're converging all these realms, that the business world, the political world, the religious world, they're not going to be separate entities. And you've got tech giants that are rolling in money who are pushing this. And it definitely isn't out of love for you and me or the average person. And you think of Satan as a real entity, is on the world stage, and he wants to raise his man up. That's what the Bible is very clear, that there is going to be an antichrist, that once the world is regionalized and there are 10 world leaders, that Antichrist is going to hijack the entire thing. So even if these men had good motives or were very sincere, the Bible predicts what is going to happen in our world in a very real way. It's going to get hijacked. And that man, that great political leader who's going to come out of utter obscurity, is going to steal the stage. He's going to steal the technology. He is going to have remarkable power, and he'll subdue these world leaders. They're in for a big shock, Tony. They think they've hoodwinked all of us. Really, the devil is going to hoodwink them.
That's right. I think people don't, necessarily realize it. Really, it's a Luciferian master plan, with the ultimate Luciferian being Lucifer himself. And he has no allegiance to human beings. He will use them and spit them out if it suits him. And really, it's the devilish plan. And I've mentioned many times to people that Revelation 13 says that they worship the beast and they worship the dragon, who gives power to the beast. And we know that the dragon is Satan. And so when it comes down to it, it's going to be satanic worship. And I think people are going to know that is what they're doing. They're going to be choosing it, when it comes to the mark of the beast and so on. So the beast is still subservient to Lucifer, or Satan. Yeah. I mean, some people think Lucifer and Satan are two distinct beings, whatever you think about that. But it is Satan that is the ultimate controller of the plan for the beast system. And, of course, it's written, as you say. So God is still only going to allow it in his timing, because ultimately God has a plan that's bigger even than the devil's plan. So, but just to finish off, what do we do?
What do we do in this hour? Do you know, this morning I was meeting on Zoom with a group of national leaders, British church national leaders, very godly men with widespread ministries. And they were addressing this issue. I was speaking to them on the Great Reset, explaining about it. And this is a central issue we're beginning to deal with and will deal with in the months ahead, to bring a message to Britain and to the churches in Britain of what we are to do in this hour. And it's essential. I would certainly say, for those who don't know Jesus Christ, you're either going to have to reject that the Bible is true, because my Bible is predicting accurately everything that is happening. And I would exhort everyone listening to believe in Jesus Christ. He loves mankind. He died for them. He suffered for their sins. He cares for them. He so loved them that he laid down his life on the cross, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And do you know, Tony, he saved me. He changed my life. I would have destroyed my life in alcohol and sin and just depravity. I would have destroyed my life. But Jesus saved me and changed me. And I'm not trying to believe in some dead religion. It's a real living person. So I believe this is the central, essential answer for this hour. When we see all this technology, it seems like there's no escape. I am the most free man on the planet, because I am in Christ. No one can buy me. No one can threaten me. No one can intimidate me. I'm not scared of losing my life. What can anyone do to me? I love Jesus Christ. I care about people. I'll speak my mind. I'm free from all intimidation. So there's great freedom within that. So that is one essential thing, Tony, I'd say, is this is what we do. Is anyone who's not right with God, now is the time. And not just because we say it or I say it, be persuaded by Scripture. I believe, again, you use your mind in these things, and logic is not against the gospel. It's integral to it. God wants to persuade you that this is true. And if without Christ, it's going to be a devilish world. It's a very serious time. So that's my essential thing. Of course, I've got 100 other, I don't know how far you want me to go on that, but that is the most essential thing for me.
That sounds very good. Yep. We've got to get our lives right with God, and That's got to be the number one thing. Without that, everything else is pointless, really. So
Yes.
to close up, can you tell our listeners where they can find you online?
They can find me at Limerick City Church, and we're on YouTube. We also have a website where there's hundreds of messages teaching on all these things. I've done messages, an entire series on evolution, all the missing links, and I finish off with 2 messages on the next stage of evolution, which is transhumanism. So Limerick City Church, you'll find things like that in Bible prophecy on how to be born again, how to walk with God. And you've got hundreds of messages just free online for anyone. Although, if you Google at the minute on YouTube for Keith Malcomson, The Great Reset, my videos don't come up for some strange reason.
Censorship, no doubt. Yeah. But yeah, they're still actually up there. So, yes, that's good. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this discussion again, and quite frankly, I'd love to have you back when you can have some free time again, Keith.
Sure.
That'd be awesome, because these are fascinating discussions, and I'm sure those listening will get a lot out of what you have to share.
Yeah, well, thank you for having us, Tony. Just love talking with you and just having these discussions. Not everyone is interested in these things, but I do think the timing of this, it's so essential, and you're just putting out a clear warning.
Yeah, thank you, and so are you, and that's why it's great to find people that know as much as you do and get them on here, because you tie the pieces together so well. And people should actually, I think, listen or watch your Great Reset series. You've done 4 of them, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so people should hunt them out and watch them, because they're definitely well worth it. Okay, so thank you, Keith, and we'll definitely want to chat again soon.
Amen. God bless you.
And God bless you as well. And folks, remember aminutetomidnite.com. We put all of our shows there. You can find them in audio and video format, completely separate from YouTube. And if anything happens on YouTube to our videos, they'll always be on our website separately. And of course, you can find them at the moment on YouTube as well. Please give this a thumbs up. If you've been watching it, make sure you subscribe to our channels, our iTunes channel, our YouTube channel, and bookmark and follow our website at aminutetomidnite.com. The A Minute to Midnight is run entirely 100% by donations. Really appreciate people donating to keep this running. Couldn't do it without your help, so thank you to folks that do donate. And if you want to help us out, you can do that by donating at aminutetomidnite.com. The music used in the shows is stuff that I have written, played and recorded, and you can download the music too if you want at aminutetomidnite.com. There's a bunch of free music there as well. So that's it for this show. God bless, Happy New Year, and actually may it be a blessed new year for you that are listening.